Hello, everyone. Ian Hamilton here with Good Virtual Reality, and thanks for giving me your time today. You can become a member at goodvirtuality.com and also support independent VR journalism directly with a donation. Today, I'm joined by Lucas Martell, the creator behind Walkabout Mini Golf. Walkabout is one of the first games I've recognized in the Certified Good VR collection, and many people, including other developers, see it as VR's very best game. My certification article calls it the best way to spend time with family and friends in headsets. As we record this in August of 2026, Walkabout is releasing its 41st course, part of the Evil Layers collection with Gloop Layer. And they are already starting work on course 52, scheduled to release in May of 2028. Also, work has started on a spin-off title called Walkabout Dungeon Golfer. Lucas, why don't you tell us where you're tuning in from today?
Yes, I'm in Austin, Texas. Walkabout's been kind of the thing that I've been focusing on for 6 years now. Before that, I was in the animation industry, so doing a lot of writing, directing, and pretty much all of the different hands-on stuff with that. I've been doing pretty much just Walkabout for the last 6.5 years now.
So we've got a bit of a path to cover. Can you just recap that quickly for our audience of just how you started working on this game?
Walkabout, I guess, would have actually been the third game that I released. Before that, I had done 57 Degrees North. That was for the Merge Cube. And then it also works without the Merge Cube. That one's free on iOS. I don't know if it's still on Android because it's been so long. And then also Laser Mazer, which I also believe is still on iOS for free. The genesis of Walkabout actually kind of came from Laser Mazer. And it started out as a phone game, as a mobile game, because we were using the version of Pocket Edition that you've seen where you're actually able to physically swing the phone. And it seemed like that was just a less intense version of Laser Mazer where you're actually physically walking around in the real world. Actually, not unlike Laser Dance, which I just played for the first time a couple of weeks ago. Very much sort of like a similar idea of you are physically moving through the environment, but the idea of using the accelerometer and the gyroscope to sort of like calculate your putt as you're swinging your phone, it just worked so well. And then the Quest 1 came along, and I happened to be in the very lucky point where I already had a game that ran on a mobile chipset. So porting that over to Quest 1 took like a week, and I showed it to a couple of the, at the time, Oculus folks at an Indiecade. And they were like, yeah, finish it up, bring it over to the platform, and we'll publish it. Because at the time, there wasn't a direct way. You had to have an in, or you had to get past a whole lot of different layers in order to get it onto the store. A really good time to be launching a game like that on the Quest 1 required a lot of optimization that had already been done. And then I launched in September of 2020 as a solo project. And yeah, ever since then, we've just been building up the team. Now we've got 27 people that have been working on Walkabout full-time, and we are starting to pull a couple of them now over to a few of these other projects. But yeah, that's the not so short version.
Well, let's talk about Walkabout Dungeon Golfer. How did this come together, and why did you opt to sort of plan this as a separate game?
We did actually have a couple of ideas for these other kind of game modes that could live in Walkabout. Part of it is just the complexity of the code base. And a lot of that comes down to Walkabout itself started off as a version that I coded up myself. When it initially launched, there wasn't even a settings menu. It was just 4 courses. We didn't have fox hunts. We didn't have music. It was very, very bare bones, and it was programmed to basically just do exactly what it did. Good physics engine, let people play from start to finish. I think practice mode was something that was in there from the very beginning. Multiplayer was something that was added kind of last minute, about like 2 months before release. What that means is that the code base for Walkabout has evolved massively, but it also means that we've kind of started to hit an upper limit of new functionality that we can add, because every time we add new functionality to the base game, it has the potential to break something else. And I will say that Homestar Runner was a big challenge because there was a lot of new stuff in there and a lot of new functionality, just being able to get different places and different modes. And it sounds simple, but when you have a game as massive as Walkabout really doing anything new, it becomes really, really difficult, and it risks breaking something. And it also means that it takes a lot longer. So part of that is a technical issue of just, we need to find a way to build this stuff a lot faster. And so with Dungeon Golfer, we are able to pull out the code base. We're able to take the pieces that we need, and we're kind of able to build it from the ground up and actually build it for what it's meant to be, as opposed to having to retrofit something existing. I will also say that another big reason, though, is just this allows us to sort of try to diversify. I don't know that Dungeon Golfer is going to be for everybody. The people playing Walkabout will enjoy it, but it is also going to be a fundamentally different thing than Walkabout. Breaking it up so that we've actually got a couple of different projects helps massively for internal, for play testing, for what we can do, for how quickly we can iterate. And yeah, it basically means that we should be able to get this game done a lot faster than if we tried to do it as an add-on for Walkabout.
Interesting. What you're describing has a lot in common with what I heard about H3VR2. Basically, going back to start from scratch and build from a modern version of Unity gave them a lot of the same benefits that it sounds like you're getting with a Walkabout Dungeon Golfer. So why don't you explain a little bit what you're going to be doing in Dungeon Golfer and how that differs from Walkabout Mini Golf?
Yeah, so the best way to describe Walkabout Dungeon Golfer, and I will also say that this is how the current prototypes are working, because we've been doing prototypes, gameplay prototypes, we've been doing some art prototypes, but it's still very loose and still coming together. But what we have settled on is essentially that you've got sort of a small-ish dungeon that's maybe like the size of 3 or 4 different holes kind of combined, but you're able to freely kind of putt around it. And you do have enemies that have hit points, and you do damage by putting into them. There's an exploration element where you're trying to putt around. You actually get power-ups by putting into cups that give you various different, health or attack. So very, very basic stat points, but ultimately it's kind of a roguelite, where you are playing through each of these different runs. So a run is not unlike a course. It probably takes 20 to 30 minutes or so. The thing that we have loved the most is that even in the prototypes, we started building in multiplayer. So where it really gets interesting is when you do have multiple people in there and you're able to strategize. You putt into this area, which will lure this enemy out, and then I will be able to hit him from the back and use various different power-ups and abilities in a cool way. The goal is to make it still Walkabout in that there's still an environment. There is still a big, heavy reliance on putting, and we are finding that the mini golf aspect of it really does add a fun layer of skill without the normal sort of dice roll randomization that you would get in a lot of other things. If you are good at golf, you will absolutely have an advantage, but we're designing it to be very playable to even people who aren't sort of the best at mini golf. So it's the same physics engine, but rather than just trying to get from point A to point B, there's a whole lot of different routes that you can take and a whole lot of different strategies that you can implement. And that also comes down to how you level up throughout it. For folks who don't know, roguelite, you're going to pretty rapidly building up your character, building up your strengths and your ability to take damage and all these different things. And each run through will be quite a bit different, because different abilities that you might get might mean that you want to play something in a very, very different way. So highly replayable, has a similar idea to going into and playing a course. And currently we've actually got about 4 different courses or runs that are set in completely different environments. Dungeon crawlers have, often they'll have a whole lot of different settings, not just dungeons, but it might be cyberpunk. You might have something that's set more of ancient ruins. You can kind of go into a whole lot of different environments. So that allows us to hold on to some of that Walkabout course idea within this entirely new format. So it's really fun. We can't wait to get some beta testers in there and play it. And we've already gotten so much out of the people who have been playing it, even in these very, very early stages of what works, what's fun. And we're just really trying to hone in on that. That's the big idea. It's a whole lot of different elements that are coming together, and it's much more easy to wrap your head around when you see it versus me explaining it.
How are you animating these enemies? I can remember going into Labyrinth with you, and I got to see some of your first characters that you modeled in Labyrinth. By the dinosaur course, you had some of them moving and really being quite animated. But in some of the Evil Lair courses, you have these villains who are sort of not really present so much. It's like they've left, or they've left this environment for you to interact with. So I want to understand how different it feels to have these characters, how you're animating them, and what that approach is.
Yeah. Well, I will say that just in this early prototype phase, we don't actually have any animation on them yet. Right now, they're kind of moving like chess pieces. And the thing that makes that actually works from a gameplay standpoint about that is that you have a pedestal that the characters are sitting on, which that means that you have a really clear surface to bounce off of when you impact them. So it also kind of has a little bit like a billiards feel, where in many cases, it's not only about hitting that target, but then you also want to bounce back to an area that is safe. Or maybe you try to bounce off of them, hit a wall, and then hit them again for a double hit or something like that. So adding that kind of currently we've got just a cylindrical base, but we're playing around with different shapes. That really sort of like lends itself well to mini golf because it just provides this very constant surface. So the characters then sit on top of that. Currently, they're not animated. We still need to figure out exactly how much we're going to animate them, but it does play as a bit of an abstract version. You're not just like putting between the legs of characters. It's a little bit more abstract, which actually makes it more fun, I would say.
Interesting. You've got a lot of assets to pull from across these 40 plus courses. Are people going to recognize those assets? Are you rebuilding them? Is it all going to be entirely new? Sort of how are you pulling from your library of content that you've made to build this? And then I got to also just put you on the spot and ask, are we going to get to use the slingshot in Dungeon Golfer as well?
We don't currently have the slingshot planned at all because it's all putting. That said, the flat version does use kind of a version of, not unlike the mobile version was using with the sort of like the pull to putt, which kind of works like a slingshot mechanic. I think that it's going to be a mix in terms of reusing assets. There are definitely some worlds that we're envisioning that do kind of have a at least spiritual tie to one of the other Walkabout courses. So you might recognize some things, but just about everything, because it's going to be functioning at kind of a different scale and in a different way, almost all of it will need to be rebuilt in at least some way. But yeah, I do think that there's going to be a couple of opportunities that we could do a run that is sort of more inspired by a specific course. Having a lot of fun just playing around with how many different types of worlds can we do that still kind of fit into this dungeon crawler type structure.
Earlier this year, it had to have some layoffs. It was part of a whole wave of pullback across the VR industry after Meta sort of shifted its strategies. We've got another Meta Connect coming up after this, where we sort of expect to see Meta's next generation headset. You also stopped development of the Pocket Edition of Walkabout Mini Golf, and that was kind of a heartbreaking moment for me because it was beautiful work. It was a really great version of the game. You're doing crossplay and you're doing a flat version of Walkabout Dungeon Golfer, and I got to understand why you would do that after sort of leaving the Pocket Edition to die, basically.
Yeah, and there's some really clear reasons that I'm glad that I know that your audience is largely industry folks, so I think that they'll kind of be able to understand a lot of this because most of it just comes down to the business side of things. The reason that we had to let go of Pocket Edition, one, it was kind of part of the downsizing that we had to do, but it was also getting to the point because Walkabout Mini Golf is such a big game and there is so much that you can do in there and there are so many different mechanics and other activities and all these different things that every time we were trying to add a feature or solve a bug, it seemed like Pocket Edition was taking up a lot more time to figure out how are we going to handle this in Pocket Edition? How are we going to solve this, this design problem? And a lot of that just came down to, again, the sheer size of Walkabout and how many people are sort of working on that. I also absolutely love the mobile version, and I feel like it's a really cool example and a cool use of the technology that's unlike what anybody else is doing. The fact that you could play it crossplay is fantastic. At the same time, one of the things that we were really hoping for and kind of counting on with Pocket Edition is that it might be able to break through because it no longer required people to have a headset. And what we've learned is that the premium games on mobile, that business model is pretty much just dead. It's pretty much broken. There are very, very few people who have managed to sort of have a successful premium game on iOS or Android even. There are ways of doing it as a free-to-play, but that goes against sort of everything we have built Walkabout to be. And in order to turn it into a free-to-play game would require a massive effort. It would require completely changing how the game works and how, even just to add ads. It seems like, oh, that shouldn't be that big of a deal, but how those types of games really function uses all of these different patterns, and that's just not us, and it's not what we wanted to spend all of our development time turning it into a free-to-play and adding all of this other stuff that I think that the core Walkabout fans wouldn't appreciate anyways. So it seemed like it was a real risk, and ultimately we just had to say that, okay, this isn't working and we're spending far more money than we're able to hold on to with Pocket Edition. And it was just a matter of like, either we're going to keep Pocket Edition alive and keep losing money, or we're going to have to let it go and take what we've learned and apply that to the next thing. So what I will say about Dungeon Golfer is the plan for that one is that we are not targeting mobile. We are targeting Steam and possibly console. We don't know exact platforms yet, but that game I feel like is going to appeal to more of the folks that you would find on Steam and playing with consoles. So it's going to have a different gameplay loop, and the hope is that then that will be able to cross over a little bit more. And it's also aiming for platforms that have a premium model so that we don't have to have this completely different free-to-play model just in order for it to work on mobile. I realize that's very insider baseball in terms of, how games being able to turn a profit works, but that's one of the hard lessons that we learned with Pocket Edition.
Very, very interesting. And I do appreciate sort of understanding that strategy. I think it'll come as news to some people, and they'll just be appreciative to kind of have your kind of insider take on exactly why you had to make these decisions this way. I had Rec Room's Sean Whiting. So Sean Whiting was creating community at Rec Room for many years. I had him sort of recap that journey in such different companies. What Rec Room was, the startup that raised extraordinary amounts of money from investors. They arrived at this moment where they reached all the people they could possibly reach inside of VR headsets, and then kind of said, well, where do we go from here? And then they targeted Xbox and flat editions everywhere. After it all, didn't see a way to kind of deliver the vision that they had pitched to the investors. And so they just shut it down. When I contextualize that story, what has it meant to own Mighty Coconut as a single person and a single person sort of building these games? Was there a time where you were offered investment money and you said, no, thank you? And how does that decision get made?
I will say that, yes, that has absolutely happened, where we have had some people offer either investment money or buying and said no because it didn't make sense. I've been around long enough to realize that when something like that comes along, there's a lot of strings attached, and there's an expectation of this exponential growth. And while I'm a big, I love VR, I'm a big supporter, I wasn't necessarily seeing a future. And I mean, it seems like that has happened where, yes, we have seen growth, but it hasn't been to the level that those types of investors often want to see. And I've also seen so many companies kind of get yanked around. And we've seen this with all of the different studio closures that have happened where a company gets bought. And even if they are profitable, there is this push to make 10x what they're spending on stuff. And it just seems like it's a very unsustainable model. And it also means that there's a lot of times where you could have a game that, yeah, sure, it is making, it is making a profit, but it's not enough, and you still end up getting shut down, or something happens at the larger owner level where there's a restructuring and all of a sudden your mandate changes. I've done that dance before, especially in the film industry, and I just don't like it. Yes, the more money is nice, but the more money comes with so many strings and so many concessions that it means that you can't run things the way that makes sense. And currently we're entirely player supported, which just means that, what people are spending on the DLCs and the base game, that's what's going into development. That's what allows us to keep making courses. I won't say that it's easy, and it's definitely gotten a lot harder this last year or two, just with everything going on in the industry. But we're still able to make it work. And it's the difference of, okay, we had to cut back. We had to right size things to make sure that we were able to keep doing it. But it didn't mean that some executive said, hey, we're shutting you down. You've got to let everybody go. And it doesn't exist anymore. So while difficult, it's also been the best thing in the world to just have that control and to steer our own ship, even if we're just, one, little tiny ship out there in the middle of the ocean.
You mentioning being this tiny little ship in the ocean made me think of Ocean Maker. And why don't you tell people what Ocean Maker was? Just give a little tease there that I think that's pretty available online if people want to watch that short film. It's a beautiful little story.
If you just Google the Ocean Maker, you can find it very easily. So that was the short film that essentially sort of started the company. So prior to that, I had made Pigeon Impossible, sold that to Fox. That became Spies in Disguise, the last film that Blue Sky Animation Studios made, ironically, before they were bought by Disney and shuttered. The Ocean Maker was a second short that I had done. And after Pigeon Impossible was a 5-year odyssey of learning how to animate, and I finished it in 2009. And so it was right at that early stage where it was just becoming possible for a small team to make something that was, indistinguishable from the average viewer as something that might have come from one of the larger studios. So after doing that, I wanted to do another short film, but I wanted to find a way to do it in a way that wasn't going to take 5 years and that we could have a larger team, especially of professionals, because the other people who were working on Pigeon Impossible, we were all learning at the same time. Everyone was amazing, but it was slow when everyone is kind of learning, including myself. So with Ocean Maker, we wanted to get a group together and we wanted to do it as a little bit more like an indie film where you get everybody together, you go someplace and you shoot it over the course of 30 days. And for us, what that looked like is we actually ended up taking 8 people down to a little island off the coast of Belize because the cost of living was so much less down there. And a big part of the expense is just getting there. But once you are there, it's relatively inexpensive. And a big part of it was also just the kind of the life, this is a really cool thing to do, that you're going to go live on a Caribbean island for 7 weeks and make a film. And so there were 8 of us down there for 7 weeks. And I think we went down with a script and a couple of 3D assets. And we didn't quite finish the film when we were down there, but we pretty much animated like 80% of it. And then after we came back, it took it was a little bit slower to finish up the film, but still, I think it was like a year in total or something like that. And a lot of that was very sort of working the cracks, but that also sort of kind of created this group of people that became Mighty Coconut. Tad Catalando, who actually co-founded Mighty Coconut with me back in, 2014 or so. And so we were an animation and visual effects studio, but Tad is now back working with us. He is one of our main environment modelers. Henning Kachi was an animator on that. Christina Martell, my wife, was a producer on Ocean Maker. And let's see, who else do we have? I guess that's the main folks who were down with us in Belize. But yeah, so there's essentially half of us that were down there in Belize are still part of the company or have kind of come in and out as, various different projects have come up through the years.
Yeah, so just going to make that pitch out there to go watch The Ocean Maker. Go to Google, type The Ocean Maker in, and give yourself a few minutes to watch that short film. All right, Lucas, what is your favorite moment of presence in a headset?
One of the biggest ones was the very first time that I had a multiplayer social moment in VR. Was the very first time that multiplayer was added to Walkabout. And I went in there, it was during COVID, and I think Oculus had sent me a second headset, and my dad was sort of in our COVID bubble. So he was over and he put the headset on and went up to the upstairs bedroom, and we got in together, and it was amazing the very first time that we sort of saw each other and were able to communicate, and realizing just how much it felt like you were in the same room with them. Even though at the time, I think it was just a gray head with like a visor. I don't even know if that first version had lip sync or anything like that, but it wasn't so much seeing the person, it was the conversation and being able to point with your putter and talk about what they're doing, or being able to point and see something. And I mean, that has echoed itself several different times. I would say that like hopping into Gravity Sketch with some of the other team members has also been similar, because it's one thing to get in there with somebody, but to actually create these courses in VR, literally watching what Don is doing or what Henning or what Laura is sort of like building. And then, what if we did this? Or, oh, that works really good over here. Or actually, hey, no, I have a plan for that. And then you talk through it. It's almost like being on an environment or a location scout in a live action film, except you're able to get big and literally move a mountain to a different place because it works better over, 2 miles to the south or something like that. Those are kind of like the two biggest, most memorable social presence moments for me.
I love it. Is there anything else you want people to know about what you're working on? And I suppose if you can take that question wherever you want, but I've got to also roll in here. Do you have big plans for the end of 2027? I know you sort of cycle your courses and try to plan a big moment at the end of the year. Are you planning a big moment for the end of this year?
Yeah. We've absolutely got a couple of courses that are coming out, especially December and January, they're currently scheduled for. We've got a couple of really cool big courses that I think people are going to love. Same thing for 2027. We do tend to sort of put our kind of the VR version of the summer blockbuster happens right around the holidays for us. So yeah, we do tend to put a couple of our favorite, most crowd-pleasing courses right around Christmas there. So yeah, we already have both of those planned out. As for other things, I would highly recommend for everyone to sign up for our newsletter. I think it's just mightycoconut.com/connection. It's called the Walkabout Connection. All we do is just send out updates every once in a while, but whenever there's a new course, we'll send people some info on it. And as we get further on both Grass and Walkabout Dungeon Golfer, that's probably where we will be making calls for beta testers or people who want to get in early access, test it out, and help give us some feedback. So highly recommend going to the Walkabout Connection at mightycoconut.com/connection.
That was Lucas Martell with Walkabout Mini Golf and Mighty Coconut. Thank you so much for the time, and we'll talk to you in the future.
Thanks for having me.